The day Mara Vale's cooking destroyed a corrupt judge's empire started with him trying to burn her kitchen to the ground. Red Flint, Utah, 1877. A widowed woman with nothing but a cast iron pot just beat every respectable cook in town. The prize? A job that made her dangerous. The enemy? A man who owned the law itself. What happened next wasn't just about survival. It was about a lone woman who turned a frontier town's ugliest secret into its downfall. Stay until the end to see how she did it. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The smell hit first. Venison, slow braised in wild sage and juniper smoke, cut through the dust and stink of Red Flint summer afternoon like a blade through old leather. The scent curled through the makeshift cooking stations set up in the town square, past the rows of iron stoves and open fires, where 15 other contestants sweated and cursed over their entries for the annual Founders' Day cooking contest. Mara Vale didn't look up from her pot. Her hands moved steady, skimming fat from the surface with a wooden spoon worn smooth from years of use. The venison had been cooking since before dawn, the meat falling apart under the slightest pressure, the braising liquid reduced to something thick and dark that caught the light like old copper. She'd started the fire at 4 in the morning, alone in the dark, feeding split pine into the coals until they burned clean and even. No one had spoken to her since she'd arrived. That was fine. Mara hadn't come here to make friends. She'd come because the contest offered $50 in prize money and because the notice posted outside the general store had said all cooks welcome. She'd read those 3 words 5 times before she believed them. All cooks. Not all men. Not all respectable women with husbands and homes. Just all cooks. So she'd loaded her cast iron pot onto her mule's pack frame, tied down her tent canvas and bedroll, and ridden 3 days from the failed mining camp where she'd been cooking for a crew that ran out of money and scattered like smoke. Before that, a railroad camp. Before that, a logging outfit. Before that, things she didn't let herself remember in daylight. The mule was called Rust. The pot had no name but had outlasted 2 husbands, 1 stillborn daughter, and every place Mara had tried to call home since leaving Missouri 12 years ago. She pulled a sliver of venison from the pot, blew on it, tasted. Almost. The meat was right. The sauce needed 5 more minutes to finish pulling itself together, for the wild herbs to stop fighting each other and become something unified. She'd learned this timing the hard way, over years of feeding men who'd complain about anything that wasn't exactly right and stay silent when it was. That smells like hell's own kitchen. Mara's hand didn't shake. She set the spoon down on the folded cloth beside her pot and looked up. The woman standing 3 feet away wore a dress the color of creek water, with proper sleeves and a collar that sat flat the way collars were supposed to when someone had help getting dressed. Her hair was pinned up in a style Mara had last seen in a catalog from 1873. Her mouth was curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm sorry?" Mara said. "I said it smells like hell." The woman's voice carried, meant to carry, Mara realized, as 2 other women in similar dresses drifted closer. "What'd you do? Catch something diseased?" Mara looked at the woman's face, then at the other 2, then back to her pot. "It's venison," she said. "Braised since dawn. If it smells wrong to you, maybe you've been eating wrong your whole life." The silence that dropped over the surrounding cooking stations felt thick enough to slice. One of the other women, older with a face like sun-dried clay, made a small noise in her throat. "Well, I suppose we know what kind of woman enters a public contest without an introduction." Mara turned back to her pot, gave the spoon a gentle stir, watching the liquid move. Her heart was beating hard, the way it always did when she stood her ground, but her hands stayed steady. "I suppose you do," she said quietly. The women left, but Mara could feel eyes on her back for the next hour, could feel the weight of judgment settling over her station like smoke from green wood. She'd felt it before. In every town, every camp, every place she'd tried to work without a man's name attached to hers. She kept cooking. At noon, the judges arrived. There were 5 of them. Mara recognized the type without needing introductions. The town mayor, probably, red-faced and important in a wrinkled suit. A store owner with the look of someone who counted other people's money for a living. A railroad man in Eastern clothes that didn't belong in Utah. a rancher whose hands were soft enough to prove he paid other men to work his cattle, and one who didn't fit. He stood at the back of the group, taller than the others, with sun-dark skin and gray beginning to show in his black hair. He wore canvas pants and a wool shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his hands looked like they knew what work meant. He didn't talk while the others talked, just watched the cooking stations with the kind of attention Mara recognized, the way someone looked at things they actually cared about understanding. The judges moved down the line of stations. At each one, they tasted, made notes, asked questions. At each one, the cook, woman or man, stood straighter, smiled, explained their dish like they were selling something they believed in. When they reached the station 2 spots from Mara's, she heard one of the women from earlier, the one in the creek water dress, laugh in a way that sounded practiced. "Oh, it's just a simple beef roast, gentlemen. Nothing fancy, though I did use my mother's recipe for the herb rub. She got it from her mother, who brought it all the way from Virginia when they settled here in '52. The judges made appreciative noises, wrote things down. Then they moved to Mara's station. Up close, she could see the railroad man's collar was stained with sweat, and that the mayor's smile didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. The store owner looked at her pot like he was pricing its contents. The rancher didn't look at her at all. The quiet one, the man who didn't fit, met her eyes for half a second, then looked at the pot. "What are we tasting?" the mayor asked. His voice had the jovial boom of someone used to filling rooms. "Venison," Mara said, "braised with sage, juniper, wild onion, reduced over 12 hours. 12 hours? The store owner raised his eyebrows. "Seems excessive." "Seems necessary," Mara said, "if you want it right." The railroad man made a note without tasting anything. Mara watched his pencil move and knew exactly what he was writing. Difficult woman, unmarried, the kind of notes that had nothing to do with food. "Well," the mayor said in a tone that already sounded like dismissal, "let's see what 12 hours gets us." Mara served them each a portion on the tin plate she'd brought. The venison fell apart as she spooned it out, the meat dark and tender, the sauce catching the afternoon light. She included a piece of the flatbread she'd cooked on a stone beside her fire. Nothing fancy, just flour and salt and lard, but it would do for soaking up the sauce. The judges ate. The mayor's fork stopped halfway to his mouth for a second helping. The store owner forgot to look skeptical. The rancher's soft hands went still over his plate. The railroad man's pencil didn't move. The quiet one, the man who didn't fit, ate slowly, paying attention to each bite the way Mara had learned to pay attention to meat when she couldn't afford to waste a single piece. When he finished, he looked up at her. "Where'd you learn to cook?" he asked. His voice was rougher than she'd expected, not unkind, but worn in a way that matched the gray in his hair. "Same place everyone learns," Mara said, "by doing it until I stopped getting it wrong." "That's not what I asked." Mara met his eyes. They were dark brown, set deep under heavy brows, and they looked at her like she was a person rather than a problem. "I learned feeding railroad crews," she said. "Before that, mining camps. Before that, a farm in Missouri that doesn't exist anymore. This is better than anything I've eaten in a railroad camp. That's because railroad camps don't give you 12 hours or decent meat." The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close. The other judges were already moving to the next station. The quiet man followed them, but he looked back once before he did. Mara cleaned her station while the judging continued, scraped the pot, packed her utensils, rolled her canvas. Rust watched from where she'd tied him in the shade, his long ears following her movements. She gave him the last of the flatbread and scratched behind his jaw the way he liked. "Probably won't win," she told him quietly. "But the food was good. That's something." The announcement came an hour later. The mayor stood on the platform at the front of the square, in the place of honor where everyone could see him. The crowd gathered, the whole town, it looked like, plus people from the surrounding ranches and camps. Mara stood at the back near Rust, ready to leave as soon as this was done. "Third place," the mayor announced, his voice booming, "goes to Mrs. Sarah Hendricks for her excellent apple cobbler." Applause. The woman who'd made the cobbler, young, blonde, with a husband's arm around her shoulders, beamed and waved. "Second place goes to Mrs. Catherine Voss for her fine beef roast with family herbs." The woman in the creek water dress climbed onto the platform. Mara recognized the last name, Voss. She'd seen it on the land office, the assay building, the largest house on the hill above town. The woman accepted her ribbon with practiced grace, and the applause was louder this time. And first place, the mayor paused, the way men did when they enjoyed being the center of attention. Well, this year's winner surprised us all. For her 12-hour braised venison, cooked with exceptional skill and flavor, the blue ribbon goes to Miss Mara Vale. The silence was worse than the earlier judgment. Mara stood frozen at the back of the crowd. Around her, people turned to look, trying to figure out who she was, where she'd come from, what right she had to win anything. "Miss Vale?" the mayor called, scanning the crowd. "Are you here?" Mara's legs moved before her brain caught up. She walked through the crowd, feeling every eye on her, every whisper that followed her like a shadow. When she reached the platform, the mayor's smile had gone tight at the edges. "Congratulations," he said, handing her the blue ribbon and a small envelope that Mara knew contained the $50 prize. His hand didn't quite touch hers during the transfer. "Thank you," Mara said. She turned to leave the platform. The applause was scattered, reluctant, the sound of people doing something because it was expected rather than because they meant it. "Wait," Mara stopped. The quiet judge, the one who didn't fit, had stepped forward. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than inherited land. He looked at her, then at the crowd, then back at her. "My name's Ronan Creed," he said. "I run the trading post north of town. Are you looking for work?" The crowd's murmur turned sharp. Mara stared at him. "What kind of work?" "Cooking," Ronan said. "I get trappers, traders, miners passing through. They need feeding. I need someone who knows what they're doing. The last cook I had quit 2 months ago, and I've been doing it myself since then, which means I'm doing it badly." "I don't—" Mara stopped, started again. "I don't stay in one place." "Neither do most people," Ronan said. "Stay as long as you want, leave when you want. But the job's yours if you want it. 3 meals a day for whoever's at the post, plus whatever they order special. Room in the back building, separate from the men's quarters. $40 a month plus what you can make on the side. $40. Plus room and board, plus the 50 she'd just won. Mara's hand tightened on the ribbon. "I run my own kitchen," she said. "No interference. Wouldn't know how to interfere if I wanted to," Ronan said. "Kitchen's yours." Someone in the crowd, one of the men standing near the Voss family, said something Mara didn't quite catch. Whatever it was made the people around him laugh in a way that had teeth. Ronan's jaw tightened, but he didn't turn around. "Think about it," he said to Mara. "Post is 5 miles north on the main road. Can't miss it. I'll be there tomorrow if you want to talk details." He stepped back. The mayor was already calling people's attention to the next announcement, something about railroad expansion and property development, his voice booming over whatever moment had just happened. Mara left the platform, walked back through the crowd to where Rust waited. Her hands were shaking now, delayed reaction, adrenaline finally catching up. She stood beside the mule and breathed until the shaking stopped. The blue ribbon felt light as paper in her hand. The envelope felt heavier. "Miss Vale." Mara turned. Catherine Voss stood 3 feet away, her creekwater dress perfect despite the heat, her second-place ribbon pinned to her bodice like a medal. Up close, Mara could see she was younger than her manner suggested, maybe 30, with the kind of beauty that came from never having missed a meal or spent a night sleeping on the ground. "Mrs. Voss," Mara said, "I wanted to congratulate you properly." Catherine's smile was the same practiced curve from earlier. "That must have been quite a shock, winning on your first try." "I've cooked before." "Oh, I'm sure you have, in all sorts of places." Catherine's pause before the last word was delicate, calculated. "It's just unusual to see someone without connections do so well in a town like Red Flint." Mara said nothing. "My husband is Judge Harland Voss," Catherine continued. "Perhaps you've heard of him. He oversees most of the legal matters in this territory. Land disputes, business contracts, that sort of thing. Very important work." "I'm sure it is." "He was just saying this morning how carefully we need to maintain standards in Red Flint. As the town grows, you understand, we can't have just anyone setting up shop, especially in sensitive positions." Catherine's eyes flicked toward the edge of town, where Mara could just see the roof of what must be Ronan Creed's trading post. Positions that involve feeding the public, for instance. So many regulations to consider. Health standards, proper licensing, background verification. Mara looked at Catherine Voss's perfect face, her perfect dress, her perfect smile that didn't reach anywhere real. "Thank you for the congratulations," Mara said. "I'll be sure to keep those regulations in mind." She turned back to Rust. Behind her, she heard Catherine's skirt rustle as the woman walked away, and she heard the low murmur of conversation as Catherine rejoined a group of similarly dressed women near the platform. Mara untied Rust and led him toward the edge of town. She didn't look back, but she could feel Red Flint watching her leave, could feel the weight of the place settling over her shoulders like a coat she hadn't asked to wear. She made camp that night in a draw 2 miles outside town, where a seasonal creek had left enough moisture for decent grass. Built a small fire, made coffee from the last of her grounds, ate a piece of jerky that was more leather than meat. Rust grazed nearby, his bell making soft sounds in the dark. The envelope sat beside her on the log she was using as a seat. Mara opened it, counted the money inside. $50 in bills that had been folded and refolded enough times to feel soft. She added it to the small leather pouch she kept tied inside her shirt, where it joined the $11.37 she'd had before today. $61.37. Enough to get somewhere else. Enough to start over in a place that didn't know her yet, that hadn't already decided what kind of woman she was based on arriving alone with a mule and a pot. Or enough to take Ronan Creed's offer. Stay in one place for more than a month. See if $40 a month plus room and board could turn into something that looked like stability. Mara drank her coffee and watched the fire burn down. Watched the stars come out over Utah's brutal summer sky. The same stars that had been out the night her husband died. And the night she'd lost the baby, and all the nights since then when she'd learned that being alone was better than being with people who made you feel alone. In the morning, she packed her camp, loaded Rust, and rode north toward the trading post. The building sat where the main road split, one branch heading toward the mining country, the other toward ranch land and eventually the Wyoming border. It was bigger than Mara had expected, a long central structure with a covered porch, flanked by 2 smaller buildings and what looked like a stable and storage sheds behind. Goods were stacked on the porch, sacks of flour and beans, coils of rope, tools, blankets, everything a person might need if they were heading into country where supplies ran thin. 2 men sat on the porch steps, smoking. They watched Mara approach but didn't say anything. Ronan came out before she'd dismounted. He looked the same as yesterday, canvas pants, wool shirt, gray in his dark hair, except now he was wearing an apron that had seen better days, and his hands were covered in what looked like flour. "Thought you might not come," he said. "Almost didn't," Mara said. "Fair enough." He gestured toward the smaller building on the left. "That's the kitchen and dining room. Want to see it before you decide?" Mara followed him across the hard-packed dirt of the yard. The 2 men on the porch watched them pass, and one of them, young, with a prospector's sunburn, nodded at her like she was a person. It was such a small thing, that nod, that Mara almost didn't know what to do with it. The kitchen was better than she'd hoped and worse than she'd feared. Better, it had a real stove, cast iron, well-maintained, big enough for serious cooking. It had a work table, shelves, a pantry area, windows that opened for ventilation. The floor was wood, not dirt. The ceiling didn't leak. Worse, it was filthy. Crusted pans piled in the wash basin, flour spilled on every surface, mouse droppings in the corners, grease splattered on the walls. The kind of mess that came from men who knew how to cook just enough to keep themselves alive and not one bit more. "I told you I was doing it badly," Ronan said behind her. Mara walked through the space, opened the pantry, decent supplies, poorly organized. Checked the stove, needed cleaning but fundamentally sound. Looked out the back window at the yard where she could see a well and what might be a root cellar. "The room you mentioned," she said. "Where is it?" Ronan led her to the other small building. Inside was a single room with a cot, a chair, a small table, a stove for heat, and a window that faced away from the main trading post. The floor was swept. The walls were solid. The door had a lock. "It's not much," Ronan said. "It's more than I've had in a long time," Mara said. She walked to the window. From here she could see the road stretching north, could see the mountains rising in the distance, could see the kind of country where a person could breathe without feeling like the air itself was judging them. $40 a month, she said, not turning around, plus room and board, plus whatever I make on the side. That's right. Kitchen's mine. No interference. You said that yesterday. I'm saying it again. All right. Mara turned. Ronan stood in the doorway, his big frame half blocking the light. He was watching her the way he'd watched her cook yesterday, paying attention, seeing what was actually there rather than what he expected to be there. Why'd you offer me this? Mara asked. Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because your food was the best thing I've tasted in 5 years. Because I need a cook. Because you look like you could use a place to stay. That's 3 reasons. They all add up to the same thing. Mara crossed her arms. People in town won't like it. I could tell that much yesterday. Some people in town don't like a lot of things, Ronan said. Doesn't make those things wrong. Mrs. Voss already warned me about regulations and standards. Catherine Voss warns everyone about everything. It's how she fills her days. Ronan's voice was dry. Her husband's got his hand in half the property in this county, and she thinks that makes her queen of red flint. It doesn't. It just makes her loud. Mara studied his face. You don't sound like you're friends. We're not. That going to be a problem? Only if you let it be, Ronan said. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. Harlan Voss is a powerful man, and he doesn't like it when things don't go his way. If you work here, you'll be working at a place he'd rather see torn down. But I own this land free and clear. I pay my taxes and I don't break laws. There's not much he can do about that except make noise. Men like that don't just make noise, Mara said quietly. They make problems. Let me worry about the problems, Ronan said. You just worry about the cooking. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Tried to find the catch, the angle, the thing he wasn't saying. But all she saw was a tired man who ran a trading post in the middle of Utah and needed someone who knew how to turn provisions into food people would actually want to eat. All right, she said finally. I'll try it. 1 month. If it doesn't work, I leave. Fair, Ronan said. He held out his hand. Mara shook it. His grip was solid, calloused, the handshake of someone who meant what he said. Can you start today? He asked. Soon as I get that kitchen cleaned, Mara said. It's a disaster. I know, Ronan said. Why do you think I need help? Mara spent the rest of the day scrubbing. By sunset, the kitchen was still far from perfect, but it was functional. Clean enough to cook in, organized enough to work in, good enough to start building something from. She made a simple supper for the men at the post. Beans with salt pork, cornbread, coffee. Nothing fancy, but everything done right. The beans seasoned properly, the cornbread tender, the coffee strong and hot. 8 men ate that night, sitting at the long table in the dining room attached to the kitchen. Trappers, traders, a mining engineer passing through, the 2 men who'd been on the porch. They ate in the concentrated silence of people who'd been feeding themselves badly and suddenly remembered what good food tasted like. One of them, the young prospector, said, Ma'am, this is the best cornbread I've had since leaving home. Where's home? Mara asked. Tennessee. Left 3 years ago. Your mother make her cornbread with buttermilk? Yes, ma'am. That's how I made this, Mara said. Tastes better that way. The man smiled like she'd given him something more valuable than food. After they left, Mara cleaned up, banked the stove, and walked across the dark yard to her room. The small building sat quiet under the stars, and when she lit the lamp inside, the light felt like something that belonged to her. She lay down on the cot. It was harder than she'd like, but better than the ground. The room was quiet. Through the window, she could hear Rust moving in the small corral where Ronan had put him, and she could hear the wind moving through the valley, and she could hear the sound of her own breathing in a space that was hers. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara fell asleep without wondering where she'd be tomorrow. The first week passed in a rhythm Mara had almost forgotten existed. Wake before dawn, build the fire, start the coffee. Begin the day's bread while the kitchen warmed. By the time the sun broke over the eastern ridge, she had breakfast ready. Flapjacks or porridge, bacon when they had it. Eggs from the chickens Ronan kept behind the stable. The men ate fast and left faster, heading out to their traps or claims or whatever business had brought them through. Lunch was simpler. Cold meat, bread, cheese, fruit when the supply wagon brought it. Supper was where Mara let herself actually cook. She made stews that had been simmering since morning, roasts that came out tender enough to cut with a fork, biscuits that didn't taste like rocks. She used the herbs growing wild in the draws around the post, sage and wild onion, and something that tasted like thyme but wasn't quite. She stretched the supplies Ronan bought, made cheap cuts taste expensive, turned leftovers into something people asked for by name. Word spread faster than she'd expected. By the second week, men were stopping at the trading post specifically to eat. Trappers coming down from the high country, freighters hauling goods between camps, ranch hands from the big spreads to the north. They'd buy their supplies from Ronan, then pay Mara 25 cents for a hot meal that filled them up properly. "You're making more on the side than I'm paying you," Ronan said one evening, watching her count the day's coins. "You complaining?" Mara asked. "Hell no, just observing." She looked up at him. He was leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, his arms crossed, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him. Business was good. The post was busier than it had been in months. Men were buying more because they were staying longer, and they were staying longer because the food was worth staying for. "We're going to need more supplies," Mara said. "Flour especially. And if you can get real butter instead of lard, I can make things that'll bring even more people through. I'll put in an order next time the wagon comes," Ronan said. "Anything else?" "More chickens. We're going through eggs too fast. I'll see what I can do." He pushed off the doorframe, started to leave, then stopped. "Mara." "What?" "You're good at this," he said. "Just thought you should know." Then he was gone, back to the main building where he kept his ledgers and his inventory, and the business side of things Mara didn't have to think about. She stared at the empty doorway for a moment, then went back to counting her coins. The third week, Catherine Voss came to visit. Mara was in the middle of preparing supper, a venison stew, not as elaborate as the contest dish, but close, when she heard the wagon pull up outside. She didn't think much of it until Ronan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression somewhere between annoyed and resigned. "You've got a visitor," he said. "Who?" "See for yourself." Mara wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to the porch. Catherine Voss stood in the yard, still perfect in a different dress, this one the color of weak tea, with a younger woman beside her who looked like a less finished version of the same person. Behind them, a driver waited with their wagon. "Miss Vale," Catherine said, smiling. "I hope we're not interrupting." "I'm in the middle of cooking," Mara said. "Of course you are. How industrious." Catherine's gaze swept over the trading post, taking in the men working in the yard, the smoke from Mara's kitchen chimney, the general air of a place doing decent business. "I thought I'd stop by to see how you were settling in, and to introduce my sister, Margaret. She's just arrived from Denver." The younger woman nodded. Up close, Mara could see she was maybe 22, with the same careful beauty as her sister, but less practiced at wielding it. "Nice to meet you," Margaret said. Her voice was softer than Catherine's, less certain. "Likewise," Mara said. Catherine took a step closer to the porch. "I must say, Miss Vale, you've caused quite a stir in town. Everyone's talking about Ronan Creed's new cook. Some people are even saying they prefer eating here to the hotel dining room." "Food's food," Mara said. "People eat what tastes good." "Oh, absolutely. Though I do wonder—" Catherine paused, her smile sharpening. "Have you looked into the licensing requirements yet? The ones I mentioned at the contest?" "Haven't had time." "You should make time," Catherine said. "My husband takes these matters very seriously. He'd hate to see someone as talented as yourself run into legal difficulties over a simple oversight." Mara's hand tightened on the porch railing. "What kind of legal difficulties?" "Well, there are health inspections, for one, and permits for commercial cooking, and zoning regulations about what kinds of businesses can operate in certain areas." Catherine's tone was light, conversational, like she was discussing the weather. "The rules can be quite complex, but I'm sure Ronan has explained all this to you." "I run a kitchen," Mara said flatly. "That's all." "Of course, and I'm sure you run it beautifully. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the formalities. Red Flint is growing, Miss Vale. We have standards to maintain. I'd hate to see someone new to town make mistakes that could have been avoided." Behind Mara, the kitchen door opened. Ronan stepped out onto the porch, and his presence shifted something in Catherine's posture. Her spine straightened, her smile became more fixed. Mrs. Voss, Ronan said. His voice was level, polite, completely empty of warmth. What brings you out this far? Just being neighborly, Catherine said. Checking on Miss Vale, making sure she understands how things work here. Mara understands fine, Ronan said, and we're compliant with every regulation the county actually has, which you'd know if your husband had bothered to check before sending you out here. Catherine's smile didn't falter. I'm sure you believe that, Ronan, but my husband deals with these matters professionally, and he's expressed some concerns. It would be unfortunate if those concerns became official complaints. Let him file them, Ronan said. We've got nothing to hide. The silence stretched taut. Margaret shifted uncomfortably beside her sister, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. The driver kept his eyes on the horses. Well, Catherine said finally, I can see you're both very confident. I hope that confidence is warranted. She turned to Mara. Miss Vale, do think about what I've said. The last thing anyone wants is trouble. She climbed back into the wagon, Margaret following quickly. The driver snapped the reins and they rolled back toward town, leaving dust hanging in the afternoon air. Mara stood on the porch until the wagon disappeared. Then she said, without looking at Ronan, that was a threat. Yes, Ronan said. She's going to come after us. Probably. And her husband has the power to make things difficult. He does, Ronan admitted. But he also has to follow the law, same as everyone else. We're not breaking any rules, Mara. We're just doing business. Mara finally looked at him. Men like Harlan Voss don't need you to break rules. They just make new ones that you're already breaking. Ronan's expression was grim. I know. Then why? Mara stopped herself. Started again. Why put yourself in his sights? Over a cook? It's not over a cook, Ronan said quietly. It's over this post, this land. Harlan's been trying to squeeze me out for 3 years now. Wants this property for some railroad deal he's working on. Having you here, having the business pick up, it just gave him a new angle to work. So I'm making it worse for you. Maum. No, Ronan said firmly. You're making the post worth fighting for. There's a difference. He went back inside. Mara stood alone on the porch, watching the empty road, feeling the weight of red flint settling over her again like something she couldn't shake off. That night, she burned the venison stew. Not badly. Just enough that the bottom had a bitter edge she couldn't quite cook out. The men ate it anyway and didn't complain, but Mara knew. She'd let herself get distracted, let Catherine Voss's visit pull her attention away from the thing she was supposed to be good at. She hated that almost more than the threat itself. The inspection came 4 days later. Mara was kneading bread when the man walked into her kitchen without knocking. He was thin, middle-aged, wearing a suit that looked borrowed and carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. Health inspection, he announced. Mara's hands stilled in the dough. I wasn't told about any inspection. Surprise inspections are part of the process, the man said. Ensures authenticity. I'm Howard Mills, County Health Inspector. Since when does this county have a health inspector? Ronan's voice came from behind Mills. He'd followed the man in, his expression dark. Since the commissioners appointed me last month, Mills said, we're modernizing, Mr. Creed, bringing Red Flint up to territorial standards. He looked around Mara's kitchen with the air of someone already finding fault. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. What followed was an hour of Mills picking through every corner of the kitchen. He inspected the pantry, the stove, the wash basin. He examined Mara's pots, her utensils, her storage methods. He made notes constantly, his pencil scratching across the paper with sounds that felt deliberately loud. Water source? He asked. Well in the backyard, Ronan said. Same well that's been here for 15 years. Has it been tested recently? Tested for what? Contamination? Disease? The usual concerns. Mills made another note. I'll need to send a sample to the territorial office. Until we get results, I'd recommend boiling all water used for food preparation. We already boil cooking water, Mara said. Mills ignored her. Food storage is inadequate. You'll need a proper ice house, not just a root cellar. An ice house, Ronan's voice was rising. In the middle of summer, where exactly am I supposed to get ice? That's not my concern, Mr. Creed. I'm simply noting deficiencies. Mills moved to the back door, examined the threshold. Gaps here could allow rodent access. That's a violation. There are no rodents, Mara said. How can you be sure? Because I keep a clean kitchen, and I'd know if there were mice. Mills looked at her like she'd said something quaint. I'm afraid your opinion doesn't constitute evidence, miss. He consulted his clipboard. Vale, is that correct? You're the primary food preparation worker? I'm the cook, Mara said. And your qualifications? I cook food. People eat it. That's my qualification. Mills's mouth thinned. The county requires documentation of training or apprenticeship for commercial food service. Do you have any such documentation? Mara stared at him. You're joking. I assure you I'm not. I've been cooking for 12 years, fed mining crews, railroad gangs, logging camps, none of which constitutes formal training, Mills interrupted. I'll need to see certificates or letters of reference from established institutions. She won the Founders' Day cooking contest, Ronan said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. First place, judged by 5 men including me. That's a reference. A local contest doesn't meet territorial standards, I'm afraid. Mills made another note. I'm going to have to issue a conditional approval pending correction of the violations I've documented. You'll have 30 days to address the deficiencies. If they're not corrected by then, this kitchen will be shut down. He tore a page from his clipboard and handed it to Ronan. The list covered the entire sheet, everything from the alleged gaps in the door frame to Mara's lack of formal certification, from the well water to the absence of an ice house to a dozen other invented problems. This is horseshit, Ronan said flatly. Every one of these violations is something you made up on the spot. I understand you're frustrated, Mr. Creed, Mills said, his tone practiced at sounding reasonable. But these are the standards we're implementing across the territory. If you have concerns, you're welcome to file an appeal with Judge Voss's office. Judge Voss, Ronan repeated. Of course. Mills gathered his clipboard and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold. I'll be back in 30 days to conduct a follow-up inspection. I strongly suggest you use that time wisely. After he left, Mara and Ronan stood in the kitchen staring at the list of violations. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. This is my fault, Mara said quietly. No, Ronan said. This is Harlan Voss's fault. Mills works for him, probably directly, if we dug into it. This inspection was a setup from the start. They're going to shut us down. Not if we fight back. Mara looked at him. With what? You heard him. He wants formal training certificates, an ice house in the middle of summer. He wants things that don't exist. Then we make them exist, Ronan said. Or we prove we don't need them. There's got to be someone in territorial administration who isn't on Voss's payroll. You don't know that. No, Ronan admitted. But I know I'm not giving up this post without a fight, and I know your cooking is worth fighting for. He left her alone in the kitchen. Mara stood there holding the violation list, reading through the invented problems again and again, feeling the familiar weight of being unwanted settling over her shoulders. She could leave, pack up rust, take her earnings, ride out before the 30 days were up. She'd done it before, left places that didn't want her, moved on to somewhere that might be better or might just be different. It was easier than fighting. But something in her chest tightened at the thought of leaving this kitchen, this room that she'd cleaned and organized and made hers, this place where she'd spent 3 weeks cooking food that mattered to people, where she'd built something that felt almost like a home. She set the violation list on the work table and went back to her bread dough. Kneaded it harder than necessary, working out frustration through her hands. The dough took it without complaint, becoming smooth and elastic under her palms. By the time she had the loaves rising, she'd made a decision. She found Ronan in the main building, bent over his ledgers in the small office he kept near the back. He looked up when she entered. I'm staying, Mara said. Ronan set down his pen. You sure? No, Mara said honestly, but I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of men like Harlan Voss deciding where I get to exist. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Ronan warned. Voss doesn't stop halfway. Neither do I, Mara said. Not anymore. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, not quite a smile, but close. All right then. Let's figure out how to beat this. They worked late into the night, going through the violation list item by item. Some things they could address easily. Ronan hired a carpenter to seal the door gaps, ordered proper storage containers from the next supply wagon. Others were impossible by design. The ice house requirement, the formal training certificates, the water testing that could take months to complete. "We need a lawyer," Ronan said finally. "Someone who can file an appeal that actually means something." "In Red Flint?" Mara asked skeptically. "Who's going to go against a judge?" "There's a man in Salt Lake City, Samuel Chen. He's represented miners before, helped them fight land grabs. If anyone can navigate this kind of legal mess, it's him. That'll cost money." "I've got money," Ronan said. "This post is worth defending." 2 days later, Ronan left for Salt Lake City. He took the supply wagon, planning to meet with Chen, place orders for the kitchen improvements, and be back within a week. Before he left, he pulled Mara aside. "Keep things running while I'm gone," he said. "Don't let Mills intimidate you if he shows up again." "I can handle Mills," Mara said. "I know you can," Ronan said. "But watch your back anyway. Voss might try something while I'm not here." He wasn't wrong. The second night after Ronan left, someone threw a rock through the kitchen window. Mara woke to the sound of breaking glass. She was across the yard and into the kitchen before she was fully conscious, her hand wrapped around the iron poker she kept by her stove. Glass littered the floor, catching moonlight. The rock sat in the middle of the workspace, roughly the size of a man's fist. She checked the rest of the building. Nothing else disturbed. Whoever had thrown it was long gone. In the morning, she swept up the glass and boarded over the window until she could get a replacement. She didn't mention it to the men at breakfast, just served their food and went about her work like nothing had happened. But she noticed things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way certain people looked at the trading post when they passed on the road. The conversations that stopped when she came into view. The feeling of being watched that prickled at the back of her neck when she was working in the garden behind the kitchen. On the fourth night, someone tried to poison the well. Mara caught them halfway through. She'd been unable to sleep, restless with Ronan gone and the trading post feeling too quiet. She'd gotten up to check the kitchen, make sure the stove was banked properly, when she heard sounds from the yard. Footsteps. The creak of the well's wooden cover. She grabbed the poker again and slipped out the back door. 2 men stood by the well. One held a bottle, the other held a lantern turned low. In the dim light, Mara recognized them. Local ranch hands she'd seen in town, the kind of men who did what they were told for drinking money. "Put that down," she said. Both men jumped. The one with the bottle nearly dropped it. We weren't, he started. "Put it down." The man set the bottle on the edge of the well. Mara stepped closer, the poker held steady. She could smell alcohol on both of them, could see their hands shaking. "Who sent you?" she asked. "Nobody sent us," the second man said. "We were just—" "Don't lie to me." Mara's voice was cold. "Who sent you?" The men looked at each other. Then the first one said, his words slurring, "We were just supposed to scare you off. That's all. Put something in the water, make you sick, make you leave." "Whose idea?" "I don't know his name, some man in town. He paid us $10 each." "What was in the bottle?" Just kerosene. Wouldn't have killed anyone, just made the water taste bad." Mara looked at them. 2 drunk idiots who'd taken money to commit sabotage and didn't even have the sense to be ashamed of it. She should call the sheriff, should make a report, get it documented. Except the sheriff probably worked for Voss too. "Get out," she said instead. "Take your poison and get off this property. If I see either of you again, I'll put this poker through your skull." They ran. Stumbled over each other in their hurry to reach their horses, dropped the bottle in the dirt, and rode off into the dark like demons were chasing them. Mara stood alone in the yard, her heart pounding, her hands shaking now that it was over. She picked up the bottle they'd dropped, opened it, smelled the harsh tang of kerosene. They'd been telling the truth about that, at least. She dumped it into the dirt and threw the bottle as hard as she could into the rocks beyond the stable. When Ronan returned 3 days later, Mara told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with each detail. "I should have been here," he said when she finished. "You were doing what needed doing," Mara said, "and I handled it." "You shouldn't have had to handle it alone." "I've handled worse alone." Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Chen's going to take the case. He's filing an appeal with the territorial administration, arguing that the county inspection was improper and the violations are arbitrary. He thinks we've got a decent chance." "How long will that take?" "Months, probably. But it buys us time. And he's drafting injunctions to prevent Mills from shutting us down before the appeal is heard." What about the men who tried to poison the well? I'll talk to some people in town, Ronan said. Find out who hired them. Get names. It was Voss, Mara said flatly. Probably, but we need proof. Over the next week, Ronan made quiet inquiries. Talked to people who owed him favors, people who'd dealt with Voss before, people who knew how the corruption in Red Flint actually worked. What he learned confirmed what they'd already suspected. Harland Voss had a long history of using legal pressure, intimidation, and occasional violence to clear out anyone who stood in the way of his property interests. He's done this before, Ronan told Mara one evening. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the western ridge. At least 5 times that I can document. Small landholders, independent businessmen, anyone who won't sell to him. He uses the law when he can, other methods when he can't. And people just let it happen? Mara asked. Most people don't have the resources to fight back, Ronan said, or they're too scared. Voss owns the bank, half the businesses in town, and he's got connections to the railroad company. Going against him means going against the whole power structure of this county. Then why are we fighting? Mara asked quietly. If it's already decided. Ronan looked at her. Because someone has to. Because if everyone just rolls over every time a man with power wants something, then nothing ever changes. Mara didn't answer. She thought about Missouri, about the farm that didn't exist anymore, about running from every place that didn't want her, about the kitchen she'd built here, and the men she fed, and the coins she counted every night that added up to something that almost looked like a future. I talked to some of the merchants in town, Ronan continued. Quiet conversations, people who've dealt with Voss themselves. There might be others who'd stand with us if we made a formal complaint. Strength in numbers. Or it gives Voss more targets, Mara said. Maybe, Ronan admitted, but hiding hasn't kept us safe. Maybe it's time to try something else. That night, Mara lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what fighting back actually meant. Not just for her, but for Ronan. For the trading post. For everyone who'd ever been pushed out by someone with more power and fewer scruples. She thought about the broken window and the poison attempt and Catherine Voss's threats wrapped in neighborly concern. She thought about the violation list and the invented regulations and Howard Mills's clipboard, and she thought about her cooking. The thing she was actually good at, the thing that had brought her here and kept her here and made this place worth defending. Fighting back with lawyers and appeals and formal complaints, that was Ronan's world. He knew how to navigate those waters, but Mara had her own kind of power, and maybe it was time to use it. The next morning, she started planning a different kind of response. She called it a community supper. The idea came to her while she was kneading bread 2 days after Ronan returned from Salt Lake City. Her hands worked the dough automatically while her mind turned over the problem of Harland Voss. He'd been picking them off one by one, her, Ronan, the other independent businessmen who didn't bend to his will. Isolating them. Making each fight seem personal, individual, not worth other people's attention. But what if it wasn't individual anymore? Mara pulled a sheet of paper from Ronan's office and wrote out a simple notice in her careful script. Community supper at Creed's Trading Post, Saturday evening. All welcome. No charge. She made 6 copies and asked the freighters who stopped through to post them in town, at the general store, the livery, the assay office, anywhere people gathered. What are you doing? Ronan asked when he saw the notices. Feeding people, Mara said. That's what I'm good at. Mara, you fight him with lawyers and appeals, she said. Let me fight him my way. Ronan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but we're going to need a lot of food. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Ronan ordered extra supplies, flour, beans, potatoes, 3 whole sides of beef from a rancher who owed him a favor. Mara worked from before dawn until after dark, preparing dishes that could feed a crowd. Stew that would hold its heat in the big iron pots, cornbread by the dozen, biscuits that she baked in waves. A venison roast that she started 2 days early, letting it braise slow and low until the meat fell apart. She didn't know if anyone would come. The notices had gone up, but Red Flint was a town that took its cues from its powerful men. Showing up at Ronan Creed's trading post, eating food prepared by the woman Harland Voss wanted gone, that was taking a side. That was making yourself visible. Saturday came hot and still. Mara had the tables set up in the yard by mid-afternoon, long planks laid across sawhorses, enough seating for maybe 40 people if they crowded. She arranged the food on a serving table near the kitchen door, the stew in its massive pot, the cornbread stacked on platters, the biscuits still warm, the venison roast on a cutting board with a knife beside it. At 5 o'clock, the yard was empty, except for her and Ronan and the men who lived at the post. At 5:30, the first wagon appeared on the road. Mara's heart jumped. She recognized the driver, Thomas Garrett, who ran a small freight business hauling between the mining camps. He had his wife with him and 3 children in the wagon bed. They pulled into the yard, and Garrett climbed down slowly, like he was testing the ground. "Miss Vale?" he said, nodding to her. "We saw the notice." "Thank you for coming," Mara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Food's ready whenever you are." Garrett's wife, a tired-looking woman with capable hands, smiled at her. "It's been a long time since someone offered to feed my family for free. We appreciate it." They served themselves and sat at one of the tables. The children ate like they'd been starving, which maybe they had been. Freight work was unpredictable, and Garrett's operation was small enough that Voss's railroad connections could choke it out anytime he wanted. By 6 o'clock, more people had arrived. A miner named Sullivan with his brother and 2 friends. The widow Morrison, who ran a boarding house on the edge of town. A young couple Mara didn't recognize, newly married and looking nervous about being there. The carpenter Ronan had hired to fix the kitchen door, bringing his grown son. By 6:30, the yard was half full, maybe 25 people, talking in low voices and eating Mara's food. Then the merchants started coming. James Whitmore, who owned the feed and grain store. Patricia Chen, no relation to the lawyer in Salt Lake City, who ran the town's only bookshop. The blacksmith, Carl Brenner, with his apprentice. The seamstress, Ellen Shaw, who'd made dresses for half the women in Red Flint. They arrived separately, in 2s and 3s, but Mara could see them noticing each other, recognizing that they weren't alone in showing up. By 7 o'clock, every seat was full, and people were standing in groups around the edges of the yard. 50 people, maybe more. The food was holding up, barely, and the conversations had grown louder, more relaxed. Someone had brought a fiddle and was playing soft background music. Children chased each other between the tables. It looked like a community gathering. It felt like defiance. Mara was refilling the cornbread platter when Ronan appeared at her elbow. "There's someone here you should meet," he said quietly. She followed him to the edge of the yard where a man in his 50s stood talking with Thomas Garrett. He was well-dressed, but not flashy, with the kind of face that had earned its lines honestly. "Mara, this is William Sutton," Ronan said. "He runs the Merchants Association." Sutton held out his hand. "Miss Vale, this is quite the gathering you've put together." Mara shook his hand. "Just feeding people." "It's more than that," Sutton said. His eyes scanned the crowd. "Half the independent businessmen in this county are here. That's not an accident." "I sent out notices," Mara said carefully. "Anyone who wanted to come could come." "And they did," Sutton said, "which tells me something about how people are feeling, about the way things have been run, about what happens when someone finally offers an alternative." He lowered his voice. "I've heard about your troubles with Judge Voss, and I know I'm not the only one who's had similar experiences. The man's been using his position to push out competition for years. Most of us have just bent our necks and hoped we weren't next." "Maybe it's time to stop bending," Ronan said. Sutton looked at him. "You're talking about making this official, organizing resistance." "I'm talking about filing formal complaints," Ronan said, "about documenting Voss's pattern of corruption and bringing it to territorial authorities who aren't on his payroll." "That's dangerous," Sutton said. "Voss doesn't take challenges lightly." "Neither do we," Mara said. The words came out before she'd planned them, but once they were out there, she didn't take them back. Sutton studied her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, I'll talk to the others. See who's willing to stand up and be counted, but I can't promise anything." "Talk to them," Ronan said. "That's all we're asking." Sutton moved off into the crowd. Mara watched him stop at different groups, lean in close, speak in tones too low to hear. She saw heads turn, eyes widen, faces shift from casual to serious. Within 20 minutes, a small group had formed near one of the tables. Sutton, Whitmore, Chen, Brenner, and 3 others Mara didn't know by name. They were talking intensely, keeping their voices down but their body language urgent. "Think they'll do it?" Mara asked Ronan. "Don't know," he said, "but at least they're talking about it. That's further than anyone's gotten before." The supper continued until after dark. People ate until the food was gone, then stayed to talk, to compare stories, to realize they weren't as isolated as they'd thought. Mara heard fragments of conversations as she cleaned up. Complaints about unfair tax assessments, denied business licenses, property disputes that somehow always got decided in favor of Voss's interests. By 9 o'clock, people were starting to leave. They thanked Mara as they went, some with words, some just with looks that said more than words could. The widow Morrison pressed a small cloth bag into her hand. "Herbs from my garden," she said, "for your cooking. It's not much, but it's plenty," Mara said. "Thank you." When the yard was finally empty except for the men who lived at the post, Ronan helped her finish cleaning up. They worked in silence, carrying dishes back to the kitchen, wiping down the tables, stacking the planks and sawhorses. "That was something," Ronan said finally. "It was just supper," Mara said. "It was a declaration of war," Ronan said, "and Voss is going to know it by morning." He was right. The retaliation came faster than either of them expected. 3 days after the community supper, Howard Mills showed up again with a new inspection report. This one was worse than the first. 37 violations, most of them so specific and technical that they clearly required a lawyer to interpret. The kitchen was now in violation of Territorial Statute 47B regarding commercial food preparation surfaces. The well water required not just testing, but certification from a territorial engineer. The building itself needed to be resurveyed to ensure it met current zoning classifications. "This is insane," Ronan said, reading through the document. "Half of these statutes don't even exist." "Then prove it," Mills said smugly. "File an appeal. Take it to the territorial courts. Of course, that'll take months. And in the meantime, I'm authorized to suspend operations immediately." "You can't do that," Mara said. "We have an injunction." "Had an injunction," Mills interrupted. "Judge Voss reviewed the case this morning and dissolved it. Turns out your lawyer in Salt Lake City filed the paperwork incorrectly. Technical error. Very unfortunate." Ronan's hands were shaking with barely controlled rage. "Chen doesn't make technical errors." "Well, he made one this time," Mills said. "Now I'm giving you 24 hours to cease all food service operations. After that, any continued activity will result in criminal charges." He left them standing in the kitchen with the new violation report. Mara read through it twice, trying to make sense of the legal language, but it was like reading a foreign tongue designed specifically to exclude understanding. "He forged this," she said finally. "Voss or Mills or someone. These violations, they're too perfect, too precisely designed to be impossible to fix." "Of course they did," Ronan said. "But proving forgery means getting access to territorial records, comparing documents, finding witnesses. That takes time we don't have." "Then what do we do?" Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We go public, loud and public. Force Voss to either back down or show his hand completely." "How?" "The Merchants Association has a meeting tomorrow night," Ronan said. "Town Hall, 7 o'clock. It's supposed to be about new business licensing procedures, which I'm betting is just another scheme Voss is pushing. But if we can get on the agenda, we can present our case in front of the whole business community." "They won't let us on the agenda," Mara said. "They will if enough members demand it," Ronan said. "Sutton's been talking to people since the supper. I'll bet he can make it happen." He left immediately to find Sutton. Mara stayed in the kitchen, staring at the violation report, feeling the walls closing in. 24 hours. After that, serving food became a criminal act. She thought about the men who'd be eating supper tonight, the trappers and traders and miners who'd come through expecting a hot meal, the community that had gathered in this yard 3 days ago, eating her food, talking about standing together. 24 hours wasn't enough time to fight this legally, but it might be enough time for something else. Mara spent the rest of the day cooking. She made everything she could with the supplies they had left, bread and stew and biscuits and a roast that filled the kitchen with smells that made her eyes water. She cooked like she was fighting, like every perfectly seasoned dish was an argument, like every tender piece of meat was evidence. That night at supper, she told the men what was happening. "They're shutting down the kitchen," she said, "tomorrow. Some legal thing about violations and permits. I don't understand all of it, but the end result is I won't be allowed to cook for you anymore." The silence that fell over the table was heavy. Finally, Sullivan, the miner who'd come to the community supper, said, "That's horseshit. It's legal horseshit, Mara said, which apparently makes it official. It's Voss, another man said. Has to be. He's been trying to run Ronan out for years. Well, he's about to succeed, Mara said. Her voice was flat, tired. Without the kitchen, this post can't sustain itself. Men don't stop here just for supplies. They stop because the food's good. Take that away, and Ronan loses half his business. So what are you going to do? Sullivan asked. Mara looked around the table at their faces. Rough men, most of them, used to hard work and harder luck. Men who'd been eating her food for weeks now, who'd started coming back specifically because of what she cooked. I'm going to fight, she said. Tomorrow night. There's a meeting at the town hall, Merchants Association. Ronan's trying to get us on the agenda. If he does, I'm going to stand up in front of everyone and tell them exactly what Voss is doing. Put it all out there where he can't hide it. That's brave, one of the trappers said quietly. Also probably stupid. Probably, Mara agreed, but I'm done running, and I'm done letting powerful men decide where I get to exist. The next day crawled past. Ronan came back at noon with news. Sutton had gotten them on the agenda, last item of the night. They'd have maybe 15 minutes to present their case before the association voted on whether to pursue the matter formally. 15 minutes, Mara repeated. It's better than nothing, Ronan said. And better than I expected, honestly. Sutton had to call in every favor he had to make it happen. They spent the afternoon preparing. Ronan gathered documentation, copies of both inspection reports, the dissolved injunction, records of similar cases where Voss had squeezed out competitors. Mara wrote out notes about what she wanted to say, though she knew when the moment came she'd probably abandon them and just speak from her gut. At 6:30, they walked into town. The town hall was already half full when they arrived. Mara recognized most of the faces from the community supper. The merchants, the independent businessmen, the people who'd shown up to eat her food and realized they weren't alone in resenting Voss's control. But there were others too. Men in expensive suits who looked like they belonged to Voss's circle. Women in fine dresses who watched Mara with the same disdain Catherine Voss had shown. And at the front of the room, sitting at the head table with 4 other association members, was Harlan Voss himself. Mara had seen him before, at the cooking contest, though he hadn't been judging, but she'd never been close enough to really look at him. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that would have been handsome if it hadn't been so cold. He wore his authority like expensive clothing, easy and natural, like he'd been born knowing he was better than everyone else. He saw her looking and smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. The meeting started with routine business, approval of minutes, treasury report, committee updates. Mara barely heard any of it. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Beside her, Ronan sat perfectly still, but she could see tension in his shoulders. Finally, after an hour of bureaucratic tedium, the chairman, a nervous-looking man who kept glancing at Voss, said, "Last item on the agenda. Ronan Creed has requested time to address the association regarding recent county health inspections. Mr. Creed, you have 15 minutes." Ronan stood, walked to the front of the room, set his papers on the podium, and looked out at the crowd. "Thank you," he said. His voice was steady, clear. "I'm here tonight because I believe the health inspection process is being abused. Not to protect public safety, but to eliminate competition and consolidate power." A murmur went through the crowd. Voss's expression didn't change. Ronan laid out the case methodically. The first inspection with its invented violations. The impossible requirements, ice houses in summer, formal training certificates that didn't exist. The second inspection that appeared 3 days after the community supper, with violations so technical they required legal expertise to even understand. The dissolved injunction based on a supposed filing error that Ronan's lawyer swore hadn't happened. "This isn't about health standards," Ronan said. "This is about using the law as a weapon, and I'm not the first person this has happened to." He pulled out more documents, cases from the past 5 years where small businessmen had faced similar pressure. A feed store owner forced to sell after repeated tax disputes. A freighter who lost his license over alleged safety violations. A boarding house shut down for zoning issues that appeared overnight. Every one of these cases, Ronan said, resulted in the affected property being sold to interests connected to Judge Voss. Every single one. The murmur grew louder. People were leaning forward now, paying attention. Even the ones who'd come in looking skeptical were starting to look interested. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Creed, Voss said from his seat at the head table. His voice was calm, almost bored. Do you have any actual evidence of wrongdoing, or just a conspiracy theory? I have a pattern, Ronan said, which is more than enough to warrant investigation. A pattern of lawful inspections finding legitimate violations, Voss said. That's not corruption, that's enforcement. Then why did the second inspection happen 3 days after a community supper? Mara said. She hadn't planned to speak yet. The words just came out, loud and clear in the silence after Voss's response. Every head in the room turned toward her. Voss looked at her like she was an insect he'd found on his dinner plate. I'm sorry, who are you? Mara Vale, she said, standing up. The cook you're trying to run out of Red Flint. I'm not trying to run anyone anywhere, Miss Vale. I'm simply ensuring that businesses in this county meet basic health and safety standards. By inventing standards that don't exist? Mara walked toward the front of the room. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them at her sides where no one could see. By sending inspectors with clipboards full of violations that were written before they even looked at my kitchen? If you believe the inspections were conducted improperly, you're welcome to file an appeal. I did file an appeal, Mara interrupted, and you dissolved the injunction on a technicality that my lawyer says never happened. Your lawyer is mistaken. My lawyer is the best land rights attorney in Utah, Mara said. He doesn't make filing errors. She reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. Looked at all those faces, some sympathetic, some hostile, most uncertain. She thought about every place she'd run from, every time she'd packed up rust and moved on rather than fighting. I came to Red Flint for a cooking contest, she said. I won that contest. Fair and square, judged by 5 men, including Judge Voss's own friends. And because I won, because I was good at something, Ronan Creed offered me work. Honest work. Cooking food for people who needed feeding. She could feel tears trying to build behind her eyes and force them back. Not here. Not now. I've been cooking for 6 weeks, she continued. In that time, I've fed hundreds of people. Trappers and miners and freighters and merchants. I've never made anyone sick. I've never served bad food. I've never done anything except the job I was hired to do. But because that job threatens someone's business interests, because it makes me visible in a way that powerful men don't like, I'm being shut down. Not because I did anything wrong, because I exist. The room was completely silent now. 3 days ago, I hosted a community supper, Mara said. Free food for anyone who wanted to come. 50 people showed up. Good people, independent people, people who are tired of being squeezed and pushed and told what they can and can't do by men who think power means they get to decide everything. She turned to look directly at Voss. 2 days after that supper, I got a second inspection with 37 new violations. Violations so specific and technical that they had to be written by someone with legal training, someone who knew exactly what language to use to make them impossible to fight. Voss's face remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. You can sit there and pretend this is about health standards, Mara said. You can hide behind clipboards and regulations and legal language. But everyone in this room knows what this really is. It's a powerful man trying to crush a woman who won't disappear quietly. That's quite a speech, Miss Vale, Voss said. His voice had an edge now, the boredom replaced by something sharper. But speeches don't change facts. Your kitchen violated county health codes. Those violations were documented by a licensed inspector. Whether you like the timing or not is irrelevant. Then show us the violations, someone called from the crowd. Mara turned and saw it was Sullivan, the miner from the community supper. Read them out loud. Let everyone hear what she supposedly did wrong. Voss's mouth tightened. That's not... Seems fair to me, another voice said. Whitmore, the feed store owner. If the violations are legitimate, they should stand up to public scrutiny. Association business doesn't work that way, Voss said. We don't litigate individual cases in open meetings. We're not litigating, Sutton said, standing up from his seat near the back. We're asking for transparency. If the county health inspection process is being applied fairly, there should be no problem sharing the documentation. Voss looked around the room. Mara could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to shut this down without making it worse. The people who'd come in wearing expensive suits were starting to look uncomfortable. The ones who'd been at the community supper were leaning forward, waiting. The documentation is available through proper legal channels, Voss said finally. If Mr. Creed wants to review it, he can file a formal request. Why can't we see it now, Mara said. If it's legitimate, what are you hiding? I'm not hiding anything. Then prove it. Mara said. "Stand up here and read the violations out loud. Tell everyone exactly what I did wrong that was so terrible it requires shutting down a functioning kitchen." The silence stretched. Voss stared at her and Mara stared back, refusing to look away. Her heart was racing, but her voice stayed steady. "This is ridiculous," Voss said finally. "I don't have to justify lawful county business to a cook with an agenda. The agenda is yours," Ronan said quietly. He'd been standing to the side, letting Mara speak, but now he stepped forward. "You've been trying to force me off that land for 3 years. You've offered to buy it twice at half its value. When I wouldn't sell, you started making things difficult. Inspections, tax disputes, permits that mysteriously needed renewal. And when Mara showed up and made the post profitable again, you decided to use her to get to me." "That's defamatory," Voss said. "It's accurate," Ronan said. "And everyone here knows it." He turned to address the crowd directly. "How many of you have dealt with sudden inspections after refusing to sell property? How many have faced new regulations that seem designed specifically to target your business? How many have been told that if you just cooperated, if you just let the right people buy what they wanted, all these problems would disappear?" Hands started going up around the room. Not all of them, maybe a third, but enough. Enough to show a pattern, enough to prove Ronan's point. Voss stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned." "You can't adjourn," Sutton said. "You're not the chairman. As the senior member of this association and a sitting judge—" "You're a judge in your courtroom," Sutton interrupted. "Here, you're just another merchant, and we have rules about how meetings are conducted. Mr. Creed still has 7 minutes of his allotted time." Voss looked at the chairman, the nervous man who'd been glancing at him all night. "Adjourn this meeting, now." The chairman hesitated, looked at Voss, then at the crowd, then at Sutton. His hands were shaking. I think we should hear the rest of Mr. Creed's presentation," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Voss's face went cold. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," the chairman said, "but it's mine to make." Voss stood there for another moment, then turned and walked out of the town hall. His footsteps echoed in the silence. 3 of the men in expensive suits followed him, along with both women in fine dresses. The door slammed behind them. The tension in the room broke like a fever. People started talking all at once. Some were angry, at Voss, at the situation, at themselves for not speaking up sooner. Others were scared, already calculating what retribution might come. But underneath it all, Mara could hear something else: relief. The kind that came from finally naming a thing everyone had pretended not to see. Sutton made his way to the front of the room. "I think," he said loudly, cutting through the noise, "we need to vote on whether to pursue a formal investigation into county inspection practices. All in favor?" Hands went up. Mara counted quickly, more than half the room, maybe 2/3. "Motion carries," Sutton said. "I'll draft a letter to the Territorial Administration requesting an independent review. Mr. Creed, Miss Vale, thank you for bringing this to our attention." The meeting dissolved into smaller conversations. People surrounded Mara and Ronan, asking questions, sharing their own stories, offering support. The widow Morrison hugged Mara without saying a word. Sullivan shook Ronan's hand so hard it looked like it hurt. Mara found herself talking to a woman she didn't know, middle-aged, with work-roughened hands and a direct gaze. "My husband lost his freight business 2 years ago," the woman said. "Voss claimed the route permits weren't filed correctly. By the time we got it straightened out, we'd lost all our contracts. Had to sell the wagons just to pay the legal fees." "I'm sorry," Mara said. "Don't be sorry," the woman said. "Just don't back down. Someone needs to stand up to him, and it might as well be you." By the time Mara and Ronan left the town hall, it was nearly midnight. They walked back toward the trading post in silence, both too tired to process what had just happened. "That was risky," Ronan said finally. "I know," Mara said. "Voss is going to retaliate, probably hard." "I know that too." They walked a few more steps. Then Ronan said, "Thank you." Mara looked at him. "For what?" "For not running," he said. "For standing there and calling him out in front of everyone. That took guts." "It took anger," Mara said. "Guts would have been doing it sooner." "Sooner you wouldn't have had a room full of people who'd already seen what he was doing," Ronan said. "Timing matters." Maybe he was right. Mara didn't know. All she knew was that she'd burned a bridge tonight, had made herself visible in a way she could never take back. Whatever came next, she'd have to face it. Running wasn't an option anymore. They reached the trading post just after midnight. The building sat dark and quiet under the stars. Tomorrow, the 24-hour deadline would expire. Tomorrow, serving food would technically become a criminal act. But tonight, Mara had stood in front of the most powerful man in Red Flint and called him a liar to his face. It wasn't victory, but it was something. She woke to the smell of smoke, not the familiar smoke of a cooking fire, but something sharper, more wrong. Mara was out of bed and pulling on her boots before her mind fully caught up with what was happening. Through her window, she could see orange light flickering against the dark sky. The main building was on fire. She grabbed her shawls and ran across the yard. Ronan was already there with two of the men who lived at the post, hauling buckets from the well, throwing water on flames that were eating through the western wall of the trading post. The fire was concentrated in one area. Deliberate, Mara realized. Someone had set this. "The kitchen!" she shouted to Ronan. "It's fine," he yelled back. "Fire's contained to the main building. Help with the buckets." They fought the fire for an hour. By the time they got it under control, the sun was rising and the western wall of the trading post was a blackened ruin. The structure hadn't collapsed, but a third of Ronan's inventory was destroyed. Tools and blankets and dry goods, all turned to ash and melted metal. Ronan stood in the yard staring at the damage, his face streaked with soot, his hands blistered from the bucket handles. "This was Voss," he said quietly. "You can't prove it," one of the trappers said. "Don't need to prove it," Ronan said. "Everyone knows it." Mara looked at the ruined wall, at the smoke still rising from the wreckage, at the exhaustion on Ronan's face. Last night at the meeting had felt like a victory. This morning felt like what victory actually cost. "We should report it," she said, "to the territorial marshal, not the local sheriff." "By the time a marshal gets here, any evidence will be gone," Ronan said. "If there ever was evidence, whoever did this knew what they were doing." He was right. The fire had started in a spot with no witnesses, no direct line of sight from any of the sleeping quarters. Quick and professional. The kind of thing you hired done if you had money and wanted to send a message. By noon, word had spread to town. People started showing up, some to gawk, some to help. Sullivan and 3 other miners arrived with lumber they'd bought from their own pockets. The carpenter came with his son and started assessing what could be salvaged. Whitmore brought supplies from his store and refused payment. "Consider it an investment," he said when Ronan tried to give him money, "in making sure Voss doesn't win." Catherine Voss came in the afternoon. She arrived in her wagon with Margaret beside her, both of them dressed like they were going to a social call. Mara was helping clear debris from the damaged wall when she saw them pull into the yard. "Miss Vale," Catherine said, climbing down from the wagon. "We heard about the fire. How terrible." Mara set down the charred plank she'd been carrying. "Did you?" "Oh, yes. The whole town's talking about it." Catherine walked closer, her eyes scanning the damage with what might have been satisfaction under the practiced concern. Such a tragedy, and so soon after that unfortunate meeting last night. "Unfortunate for who?" Mara asked. Catherine's smile was thin. "For everyone involved, I'd say. My husband came home quite upset. He doesn't appreciate being accused of corruption in public forums." "Then he shouldn't have been corrupt," Mara said flatly. "That's a very serious allegation," Catherine said, "the kind that could be considered slander if you repeated it to the wrong people." "I'll repeat it to anyone who'll listen," Mara said. "Your husband tried to shut down my kitchen because I wouldn't disappear quietly. And when that didn't work fast enough, someone burned Ronan's trading post. That's not coincidence." "You have no proof my husband was involved in any fire," Catherine said. Her voice had gone cold now. The pretense of neighborly concern dropped. "And making accusations without evidence is exactly the kind of reckless behavior that causes problems for people like you." "People like me," Mara repeated. "Outsiders," Catherine said. "Women without family or standing who show up and cause disruption. Red Flint was peaceful before you arrived, Miss Vale. Now we have merchants turning on each other, respected men being slandered in public meetings, and property being destroyed. You're like a disease that's infected this town." Mara took a step forward. Catherine didn't flinch, but Margaret shifted nervously behind her sister. "I won a cooking contest," Mara said, her voice low and hard. "That's all I did." Everything that's happened since, the inspections, the threats, the fire, that's all your husband's doing. Because he can't stand that something exists in this county that he doesn't control. My husband controls this county because he's earned that control, Catherine said. Through years of service, through building institutions, through making Red Flint into something more than a collection of hovels. If you can't see that, if you'd rather believe conspiracy theories about corruption, then you're exactly as foolish as you appear. She turned to leave, then stopped. I came here to offer you a way out, Miss Vale. One last chance to avoid the consequences of your choices. What kind of way out? Mara asked, though she already knew she wouldn't take it. Leave, Catherine said simply. Pack up your mule and your pot and go somewhere else. Do that, and the legal pressure stops. The inspections go away. Mr. Creed keeps his trading post, and you get to walk away without a criminal record. And if I don't leave? Then my husband will finish what the fire started, Catherine said. He'll use every legal tool he has to destroy this place and everyone associated with it. He'll bankrupt Mr. Creed, he'll have you arrested for operating an illegal kitchen, and he'll make sure no one in this territory ever hires you to cook again. That's not a threat, Miss Vale. That's a promise. She climbed back into her wagon. Margaret followed without looking at Mara. They rolled out of the yard, leaving Mara standing in the ashes with Catherine's ultimatum ringing in her ears. Ronan appeared at her shoulder. I heard that. So did everyone else, Mara said. The other men in the yard had gone quiet, pretending not to listen, but obviously hearing every word. You don't have to stay, Ronan said quietly. This is my fight. Always has been. If you want to leave, I'll understand. Mara looked at him, at his soot-streaked face and blistered hands, at the trading post he'd built, and the land he'd defended, and the stubborn refusal to bend that had cost him a third of his inventory and might cost him everything else. No, she said. Mara, I said no, she interrupted. I'm not leaving. I'm not giving Catherine Voss or her husband or anyone else the satisfaction of watching me run. Not this time. She walked back to her kitchen. The building had survived the fire untouched, and standing inside it felt like stepping into the only space in her life that made sense anymore. She started preparing supper, even though it was only mid-afternoon, even though cooking was technically illegal now, even though doing so was probably the exact kind of reckless behavior Catherine had warned against. She made bread and stew and biscuits. She cooked the way she always cooked, with precision and care and the kind of attention that turned ordinary food into something people remembered. When the men came in for supper that night, she served them without comment. They ate without comment. The meal felt like an act of defiance that didn't need words. After cleanup, Mara found Ronan in what was left of his office, trying to salvage ledgers from the fire-damaged section of the building. Half the pages were charred, the ink bleeding where water had soaked through. How bad is it? She asked. Bad, Ronan said. He didn't look up from the ruined ledger. I can rebuild the wall, replace the inventory eventually, but the records, I've lost track of who owes me money, who I owe, what contracts are active. It'll take months to piece it back together. Unless Voss doesn't give you months, Mara said. Unless that, Ronan agreed. He finally looked up at her. Samuel Chen sent word this afternoon. The Territorial Administration received the Merchants Association letter. They're opening an investigation into county inspection practices. That's good, isn't it? It's something, Ronan said. But investigations take time, months, maybe a year, and Voss knows that. He's going to push hard now, try to finish us before any investigation gets far enough to matter. So what do we do? Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, we find proof, real proof, not just patterns and suspicions. Something concrete enough that even Voss can't explain it away. What kind of proof? The kind that shows he's been falsifying documents, Ronan said. If we can prove those inspection reports were forged, if we can show that Mills was acting on Voss's orders rather than legitimate health concerns, that's criminal fraud. The Territorial Administration would have to act. How do we get that proof? Mara asked. I don't know yet, Ronan admitted, but I'm going to find out. Over the next week, Red Flint started to fracture. The territorial investigation became public knowledge, and with it came pressure from both sides. Voss's allies, the merchants who benefited from his control, the businessmen who owed him favors, the families who'd built their standing through connection to his power, pushed back hard. They called the investigation a witch hunt. They claimed Ronan and Mara were troublemakers trying to destroy a good man's reputation. But others started coming forward with their own stories. The feed store owner who'd been forced to sell after mysterious tax liens appeared on his property. The widow who'd lost her boarding house to a zoning change that happened overnight. The freighter whose licenses had been revoked on technicalities no one could explain. Each story added another piece to the pattern, another example of Voss using his position to eliminate competition and consolidate control. William Sutton collected the testimonies and sent them to the territorial investigators, but he also started hearing threats. Someone threw a brick through his bookshop window with a note that said, "Traitors get worse." His wife started receiving anonymous letters warning that their children weren't safe. One night, he found his horse had been deliberately lamed in its stall. He came to the trading post to tell Ronan he was withdrawing from the Merchants Association case. "I'm sorry," he said, and the shame in his voice was real. "But they're going after my family. I won't risk my children over this." "I understand," Ronan said quietly. After Sutton left, Mara said, "That's the second one this week." She was right. 2 other merchants who'd been vocal at the meeting had also backed down, citing threats or business pressure or family concerns. The coalition that had seemed so strong in the town hall was crumbling under sustained attack. "We need that proof," Ronan said. "Now, before everyone gets too scared to fight." "Where are we going to get it?" Mara asked. "From the county offices," Ronan said. "The inspection reports, the building permits, the zoning records, they're all supposed to be public documents. If Voss has been forging things, there'll be inconsistencies, different versions of the same forms, signatures that don't match, something. He's not going to just let you walk in and examine his records." "No," Ronan agreed, "which is why I'm not going to ask permission." He laid out a plan that was either brilliant or insane, and Mara couldn't decide which. The county records were kept in the courthouse basement, accessible during business hours but locked at night. Ronan knew the building's layout. He'd been there enough times dealing with permits and contracts over the years. He also knew that the clerk who managed the records was a drinking man who left every evening at 5:30 and didn't come back until morning. "You're talking about breaking in," Mara said. "I'm talking about exercising my right to examine public documents," Ronan said, "in a non-traditional time frame." "That's breaking in." "It's aggressive record review," Ronan said. "And before you tell me it's too dangerous, I want you to think about what happens if we don't do this. Voss crushes us. He crushes everyone who stood up at that meeting, and in 6 months, no one even remembers we tried to fight back." Mara thought about Catherine's ultimatum, about the burned wall and the forged inspections, and the men who'd stopped at the trading post asking if the kitchen was still open, looking disappointed when she had to say no. She thought about every place she'd run from and every time she'd chosen safety over standing her ground. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow night," Ronan said. "Saturday. The courthouse will be empty except for the night watchman, and he spends most of his time sleeping in the front office." "I'm coming with you," Mara said. "Mara, you'll need a lookout," she said. "Someone to watch for the night watchman, someone to help search. This goes faster with 2 people." Ronan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "All right," he said finally. "But if anything goes wrong, you run. Don't wait for me, don't try to help, just run." "Same goes for you," Mara said. They spent Saturday preparing. Ronan made a list of what they were looking for: inspection reports, building permits, property transfer documents, anything that might show alterations or forgery. Mara packed a bag with basic tools: a pry bar in case they needed to force a drawer, candles and matches for light, cloth to muffle sounds. At 10 o'clock Saturday night, they rode into town. Red Flint was mostly dark by that hour. A few saloons still had lights burning, and music drifted from one of them, but the main street was empty. They left their horses tied behind the livery and approached the courthouse on foot. The building was dark except for a single light in the front office, the night watchman's lamp. Ronan led Mara around to the back entrance, a heavy door that opened onto a stairwell leading down to the basement. He'd brought a set of lockpicks that he claimed to have won in a card game years ago. It took him 5 minutes to get the door open. Inside, the courthouse smelled like old paper and lamp oil. They descended the stairs carefully, Mara going first with a candle cupped in her hand to hide the light. The basement was a maze of shelves and filing cabinets, all stuffed with documents that represented decades of county business. "Where do we start?" Mara whispered. Health inspection records should be in Section 4, Ronan whispered back. Building permits in Section 6. We split up, cover more ground. Mara found Section 4 and started searching. The filing system was haphazard at best. Documents shoved into drawers without clear organization, some labeled by year, others by type. Many not labeled at all. She pulled out folders at random, checking for anything related to health inspections or commercial kitchens. She found the first forged document 20 minutes in. It was a copy of her initial inspection report, the one Howard Mills had delivered with his clipboard and smug expression. But this version was different. The list of violations was longer, including 3 items that hadn't been on the report Mills had actually given them. And at the bottom, where Mills's signature should have been, the handwriting looked slightly off. Not wrong enough to be obvious, but enough that someone paying attention might notice. "Ronan," she hissed. "Found something." He appeared beside her holding his own candle. Mara showed him the document. "That's not what he gave us," Ronan said, examining it closely. "The one we have lists 18 violations. This one has 21. "Why would there be 2 versions?" Mara asked. "Because this one's the official record," Ronan said slowly. "The one that'll be submitted if we appeal. He gave us a different version so we wouldn't know what we're actually being accused of. Makes it harder to defend yourself when the charges keep changing." "That's fraud," Mara said. "That's proof," Ronan said. "Keep looking. If there's one forged document, there are probably others." They searched for another hour. Mara found 3 more versions of her inspection report, each with slightly different violation lists. Ronan found property transfer records for 2 of the cases he'd mentioned at the town hall meeting, both showing sale dates that didn't match the dates on the original purchase agreements. Someone had backdated the documents to make the sales look more legitimate than they were. "This is it," Ronan said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "This is what we need. We copy these, we send them to the territorial investigators, and Voss is finished." "How do we copy them?" Mara asked. "We can't exactly take them to a printer." Ronan pulled paper and pencils from his pack. "We trace what we can. Copy the important parts by hand. It won't be perfect, but it'll be enough to show the discrepancies." They worked quickly, Mara holding documents up to the candlelight while Ronan traced signatures and copied text. They were so focused on the work that neither of them heard the footsteps on the stairs. The basement door opened. Light flooded down the stairwell. A voice called out, "Who's down there?" "The night watchman." Mara blew out her candle. Ronan did the same. They stood frozen in the dark as the watchman's footsteps descended the stairs. "I know someone's down here," the watchman called. "Show yourselves." Ronan grabbed Mara's hand and pulled her deeper into the basement, weaving between the shelving units. They could hear the watchman moving behind them, his lamp casting moving shadows on the walls. "There's no way out," the watchman said. "Main door's locked from outside. You're trapped." Mara's mind raced. He was right. The only exit was the door they'd come through, and the watchman was between them and it now. They were caught. Unless... She remembered something from the courthouse layout. A coal chute for the basement furnace, used to deliver fuel during winter. It would be small, maybe too small, but it was a way out. She tugged Ronan's hand, pulling him toward the far wall where the furnace sat. He followed without question, trusting her even though he couldn't see where they were going. Behind them, the watchman's light was getting closer. The coal chute was where Mara remembered. A metal door set into the wall at floor level. She knelt down and tried to open it. Locked. Of course it was locked. Ronan pushed her aside and went to work with his lockpicks. Behind them, the watchman's footsteps were getting closer. Mara could see his lamplight reflecting off the shelves now. The lock clicked open. Ronan pulled the coal chute door wide. The opening was narrow, maybe 2 feet across, and angled upward to the street level. Mara could see stars at the top. "You first," Ronan whispered. Mara squeezed through the opening, her shoulders scraping against the metal sides. It was tight enough that she had to exhale to fit, tight enough that for a moment she thought she might get stuck. But then she was through, crawling up the chute toward the night air. She emerged onto the street behind the courthouse, gasping. A moment later, Ronan came through behind her, bigger than her, and having a harder time with the tight space. Mara grabbed his hands and pulled, helping him squeeze through the last few feet. They heard shouting from inside the courthouse. The watchman had found the open coal chute. "Run," Ronan said. They ran through Red Flint's dark streets, not stopping until they reached the livery where their horses waited. They mounted and rode hard, not looking back, not slowing down until the town was a mile behind them and the trading post was in sight. Only when they were safely back in Ronan's office did they realize what they'd lost. "The papers," Ronan said, searching his pockets. "The copies we made. I must have dropped them when we ran." Mara checked her own pockets. Empty. Everything they'd found, all the proof they'd risked so much to gather, was gone. Left behind in the courthouse basement or dropped in their escape. "We have to go back," Mara said. "We can't," Ronan said. "The watchman saw us. By morning, Voss will know someone broke into the records room. He'll destroy anything incriminating and beef up security. We had one chance, and we blew it." He slammed his fist on the desk, making the remaining ledgers jump. Mara had never seen him this angry, this defeated. "It's not over," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Yes, it is," Ronan said. "We're out of moves. Voss won, and we lost." He left the office. Mara stood alone in the wreckage of their failed plan, feeling the weight of Red Flint pressing down on her again. They'd been so close, had the proof literally in their hands, and now it was gone, and Voss would come at them harder than ever, and there was nothing left to fight with. She thought about Catherine's offer, pack up and leave, walk away while she still could. But then she thought about the men she'd fed, the kitchen she'd built, the place she'd almost started to think of as home. She thought about Ronan's blistered hands and the burned wall and everyone who'd stood up at that meeting before fear drove them back down. Mara walked to her room and sat on her cot. She didn't have proof, didn't have a plan, didn't have anything except a stubborn refusal to let Harlan Voss decide where she got to exist. It wasn't much, but it was all she had left. Morning came too fast. With it came a wagon carrying Howard Mills and two men Mara didn't recognize, territorial marshals based on their badges. "Mara Vale," Mills said, climbing down from the wagon with obvious satisfaction. "You're under arrest for operating an illegal commercial kitchen and violating county health codes. These gentlemen are here to ensure compliance with the closure order." Mara stood on her kitchen porch and looked at the three men. Behind her, she could hear Ronan coming out of the main building. "On what grounds?" Ronan demanded. "On the grounds that Miss Vale has been serving food in violation of a lawful closure order," Mills said. "We have witness testimony that she prepared and served meals as recently as last night." "I fed the men who live here," Mara said. "That's not commercial service." "That's for a judge to decide," Mills said. "Miss Vale, are you going to come peacefully or do we need to make this difficult?" Mara looked at the marshals. They looked uncomfortable but determined, men doing a job they'd been ordered to do. "I'll come," she said quietly. "Mara, don't," Ronan started. "It's fine," she said. "Just get me a lawyer." They put her in the wagon. As they rolled toward town, Mara looked back at the trading post, at her kitchen with its clean windows and smoking chimney, at Ronan standing in the yard looking helpless, at the place she'd almost made into home. She didn't know if she'd ever see it again. The Red Flint jail was a stone building behind the courthouse with 4 cells and a front room that smelled like old tobacco and unwashed men. The marshal who processed Mara's arrest was younger than the one who'd accompanied Mills, with a face that hadn't yet learned to hide what he was thinking. "Sorry about this, ma'am," he said as he unlocked one of the cells. "Just doing what I was told." "Everyone's just doing what they're told," Mara said. She stepped into the cell and heard the lock click behind her. The marshal hesitated. "For what it's worth, my wife ate at your community supper, said it was the best meal she'd had in months." He left before Mara could respond. She sat on the narrow cot and looked around her cell. Stone walls, a small window too high to reach, a bucket in the corner. She'd been here less than an hour, and already the space felt like it was shrinking. Ronan arrived that afternoon with Samuel Chen, the lawyer from Salt Lake City. Chen was older than Mara had expected, maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen enough courtroom battles to know which ones were worth fighting. "Miss Vale," he said, pulling a chair up to the cell bars, "I understand you've had quite a week." "That's one way to put it," Mara said. Chen opened his leather case and pulled out papers. "The charges are operating an illegal commercial kitchen and violating a lawful closure order. Both are misdemeanors, punishable by fines and up to 6 months in jail. However, given that this is your first offense and the circumstances are questionable, I believe we can argue for dismissal. When's the hearing? Mara asked. Tomorrow morning. Judge Voss is presiding. Mara laughed, a short, bitter sound. Of course he is. I've already filed a motion requesting he recuse himself due to conflict of interest, Chen said, but I don't expect him to honor it. Men like Harlan Voss don't step aside willingly. So what do we do? Ronan asked. He'd been standing behind Chen, quiet until now, looking like he hadn't slept. We present the best defense we can, Chen said. Argue that Miss Vale was feeding residents, not running a commercial operation. Point out the inconsistencies in the inspection reports. Make Voss defend his actions in open court. Without the documents we found, Ronan said quietly. Without any proof. Chen looked at him. What documents? Ronan glanced at Mara, then back to Chen. We may have accessed some county records, unofficially. You broke into the courthouse, Chen said. It wasn't a question. We exercised our right to examine public documents, Ronan said, in a non-traditional time frame. Despite everything, Mara almost smiled. Chen sighed. Tell me what you found. Ronan laid out what they'd discovered, the multiple versions of inspection reports, the backdated property transfers, the signatures that didn't match. Chen listened without interrupting, his expression growing more thoughtful. And you lost all the copies when you fled, he said, when Ronan finished. Yes, Ronan admitted. Then we can't use any of it, Chen said. Evidence obtained through illegal search is inadmissible. Even if you'd kept the copies, Voss would have had them thrown out. So we have nothing, Mara said. I didn't say that, Chen said carefully. I said we can't use evidence obtained illegally. But if someone else were to discover those same documents through legal means, say a territorial investigator with a proper warrant, that would be different. The investigation's still months away from getting warrants, Ronan said, unless we give them a reason to accelerate, Chen said. If tomorrow's hearing reveals enough irregularities, if we can demonstrate a pattern of corruption in open court, the territorial office might decide this warrants immediate action. That's a lot of ifs, Mara said. It's what we have, Chen said. Unless you have a better plan. Mara didn't. She spent that night in her cell, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the sounds of red flint settling into sleep beyond the stone walls. She thought about Missouri and the farm that didn't exist anymore, about all the places she'd run from and all the reasons she'd had for running, about the difference between surviving and actually living, between getting through each day and building something that lasted. She'd spent 12 years surviving, moving from camp to camp, job to job, never staying long enough to put down roots or make connections or give anyone a reason to remember her name. It had been safe. Lonely, but safe. Red Flint was the first place she'd stayed long enough to become visible, to be seen not just as a cook passing through, but as a person who mattered, whose presence changed things. And visibility, she'd learned, came with a cost. You couldn't be seen without also being a target. But maybe that was the price of actually living. Maybe you had to risk being hurt to have a chance at being whole. Morning came with the sound of keys rattling. The young marshal opened her cell. Time for court, Miss Vale. The courtroom was packed. Mara walked in with Chen and saw every seat filled. Merchants and miners, ranchers and freighters, women in nice dresses and men in work clothes. She recognized faces from the community supper, from the Merchants Association meeting, from her weeks of cooking at the trading post. They'd come to see what happened when someone stood up to Harlan Voss. Voss himself sat at the judge's bench, wearing his black robes, looking every inch the authority he claimed to be. Catherine sat in the front row with Margaret beside her, both dressed like they were attending a social triumph. All rise, the bailiff called. The hearing began with formalities, reading of charges, Mara's plea of not guilty, Chen's motion for dismissal. Voss denied the motion without discussion. The evidence is clear, he said. Miss Vale operated a commercial kitchen in violation of county health codes and continued to do so after receiving a lawful closure order. The law allows no exceptions, regardless of the defendant's personal circumstances. Your Honor, Chen said, standing, the closure order itself is suspect. My client received multiple inspection reports with different violation lists. She was never given clear notice of what she was accused of violating. The official report is part of the court record, Voss said. If Miss Vale received other documents, that's not the county's concern. It is when those other documents were created by county officials, Chen said. We have reason to believe the inspection reports were altered after initial delivery. That's a serious accusation, Voss said. His voice was calm, but Mara saw something flicker in his eyes. Do you have evidence? We have witness testimony, Chen said. Mr. Ronan Creed will testify that the report delivered to his property contained 18 violations while the official record shows 21. Human memory is fallible, Voss said. Without documentation, this is just Mr. Creed's word against official county records. Chen had expected this. He called Ronan to the stand and walked him through the timeline. The first inspection, the second inspection, the impossibility of the violations listed. Ronan was calm, precise, backing up everything he said with dates and details. Then Chen said, Mr. Creed, can you describe the signature on the inspection report you received? Howard Mills' signature, Ronan said, though it looked slightly off. Objection, the prosecutor, a nervous man who clearly worked for Voss, said. The witness isn't a handwriting expert. Sustained, Voss said. Chen tried another angle. Mr. Creed, in your experience dealing with county documents over the years, have you noticed any irregularities in signatures or dates? The prosecutor objected again. Voss sustained again. Every time Chen tried to introduce evidence of forgery or corruption, Voss shut him down. The hearing was turning into exactly what Mara had feared, a show trial where the judge controlled every word spoken. Then Chen called Mara to the stand. She walked to the witness box, feeling every eye in the courtroom on her. Voss watched her with an expression that might have been satisfaction. Chen started with basic questions, her background, her work history, her arrival in Red Flint. Then he asked, Miss Vale, when you accepted employment at Mr. Creed's trading post, did anyone inform you that commercial cooking required special licensing? No, Mara said. I was hired to cook for the men staying at the post, same as I'd done at mining camps and railroad camps for years. And were those previous positions licensed? No, cooks in camps don't need licenses. We just need to feed people. When did you first learn about licensing requirements? When Mrs. Catherine Voss came to the trading post and warned me about regulations, Mara said, 3 weeks after I started working. A murmur went through the courtroom. Catherine's face remained perfectly composed, but her hands tightened in her lap. Objection, the prosecutor said. Mrs. Voss isn't on trial here. I'm establishing that my client had no knowledge of regulations that were never communicated to her, Chen said. Overruled, Voss said, but his voice had an edge now. Chen continued. Miss Vale, can you describe Mrs. Voss's warning? She said her husband takes health standards very seriously, that he'd hate to see me run into legal difficulties over simple oversights. Mara looked directly at Voss. She made it clear that the regulations were designed to push me out, not to protect anyone. Objection, the prosecutor said again. The witness is speculating about intent. I'm describing what I was told, Mara said before Voss could rule. Mrs. Voss said Red Flint has standards to maintain, that outsiders who cause disruption get dealt with. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Voss banged his gavel. Order. Miss Vale, you will answer only the questions asked. I am answering the questions, Mara said. You just don't like the answers. The courtroom went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the wooden floor. Voss's face darkened. You will address this court with respect. I'll address it with honesty, Mara said, which is more than you've done. You've been using the law as a weapon since I arrived in Red Flint, not to protect anyone, not to maintain standards, just to eliminate anyone who won't bend to you. Miss Vale, Chen started, trying to rein her in, but Mara was done being reined in. Everyone in this courtroom knows what you've done, she said, looking straight at Voss. The burned wall at the trading post, the forged inspection reports, the men you hired to poison the well. You've been trying to destroy Ronan's business for years, and when I showed up and made it successful again, you decided to destroy me too. These are baseless accusations, Voss said, but his voice had lost its calm. They're not baseless, Mara said. They're just unprovable, because you're careful. You use other people to do your dirty work. You hide behind official documents and legal procedures, but everyone knows, the merchants know, the miners know, everyone who's ever stood in your way and watched you crush them, they all know. She stood up in the witness box. Chen grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but she shook him off. I came to Red Flint with nothing, she said. Just a mule and a pot, and the ability to cook food that people wanted to eat. That should have been enough. In a fair town, that would have been enough. But Red Flint isn't fair. It's yours. And you can't stand that someone exists here who doesn't owe you anything. Sit down, Miss Vale, Voss said. His hand was on his gavel. Why? Mara asked. Because you're going to find me guilty anyway? Because this whole hearing is just theater, so you can pretend you're following the law while you do exactly what you wanted to do from the start? Sit. Down. Make your ruling, Mara said. Find me guilty. Throw me in jail. Do whatever you plan to do, but everyone here will know what you are. Not a judge. Not a pillar of the community. Just a small man with too much power who can't stand being defied. The silence in the courtroom felt like a held breath. Then someone started clapping. Mara turned and saw Sullivan standing in the back row, his rough hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. Then the widow Morrison joined him. Then Thomas Garrett. Then James Whitmore. Within seconds, half the courtroom was clapping. Not cheering, not shouting, just steady applause that sounded like agreement. Voss's gavel came down like thunder. Order! Order in this court! But the clapping continued. It wasn't defiant or celebratory. It was quiet acknowledgement. Every person clapping was saying the same thing. We see you. We believe her. We're done pretending. Voss kept banging his gavel, his face red now, his composure cracking. The clapping slowly died down, but the damage was done. The performance of authority he'd been staging had been interrupted by people refusing to play their parts. This hearing is in recess, Voss said. His voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. We will reconvene in 1 hour. He left the bench in a rush of black robes. The courtroom erupted in conversation. Chen grabbed Mara's arm and pulled her aside. That was incredibly stupid, he said, but he was almost smiling. Also possibly brilliant. You just forced Voss to either back down or show exactly who he is. He won't back down, Mara said. No, Chen agreed, but he's rattled. And rattled men make mistakes. The hour passed slowly. Mara sat in a side room with Chen and Ronan, none of them talking much. She could hear the crowd noise from the courtroom, the building buzz of people who sensed something important happening. When they returned to the courtroom, Mara noticed immediately that something had changed. The territorial marshals who'd arrested her were standing near the back, talking to a man in a suit she didn't recognize. And at the prosecutor's table, there were 2 new men, both wearing badges that identified them as territorial investigators. Voss returned to the bench looking composed again. His earlier rage locked down behind professional calm, but Mara could see tension in his shoulders. Before we continue, one of the territorial investigators said, standing, I need to inform the court that we're executing a warrant to examine county inspection records. We received credible information of potential document fraud and have been authorized by the territorial administration to conduct an immediate investigation. The courtroom erupted again. Voss banged his gavel. This is highly irregular, he said. It's entirely regular, Your Honor, the investigator said. We have proper authority. The warrant was issued this morning by a territorial judge in Salt Lake City. On what grounds? On grounds of multiple complaints alleging systematic corruption in county business practices, the investigator said, including testimony from witnesses who claimed to have seen multiple versions of official documents. Mara looked at Chen. He looked back at her and gave the slightest shrug, like even he wasn't sure how this had happened. This hearing is suspended, Voss said, pending investigation of these allegations. Actually, Your Honor, the investigator said, we'd prefer if you completed the hearing. Our investigation will proceed regardless, but having your ruling on record would be valuable context. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. If Voss ruled against Mara now, he'd look like he was retaliating for her testimony. If he ruled in her favor, he'd look weak in front of the town he controlled. And if he refused to rule at all, he'd look like he was trying to dodge accountability. Voss sat frozen on the bench, caught between bad options. Finally, he said, given the serious allegations raised during testimony, and pending the outcome of the territorial investigation, I'm dismissing all charges against Miss Vale. However, he didn't get to finish the sentence. The door to the courtroom banged open. Howard Mills stood there, his face pale, looking like he'd been running. Your Honor, he said, breathing hard, we need to talk, privately. Mr. Mills, this is not the time. It's about the records, Mills said. His eyes darted to the territorial investigators. There's something you need to know. Voss's jaw tightened. This hearing is adjourned. Everyone out. The courtroom cleared slowly, people reluctant to leave but having no choice. Mara found herself standing on the courthouse steps with Ronan and Chen, watching the crowd disperse into the afternoon. What just happened? She asked. I think, Chen said slowly, Mills just broke. He probably realized the investigators are going to find the forged documents and decided to cut a deal before Voss could throw him to the wolves. You think he'll testify against Voss? Ronan asked. I think he's going to try to save his own neck, Chen said, which means giving up whoever was giving him orders. They waited on the courthouse steps for 2 hours. The sun was starting to set when the territorial investigators finally emerged. The older one, the man who'd announced the warrant, stopped when he saw them. Miss Vale, he said, you're free to go. All charges dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can't be refiled. What about Voss? Ronan asked. The investigator's expression was carefully neutral. Judge Voss has resigned his position, effective immediately. He's currently being questioned regarding multiple counts of document fraud, abuse of judicial authority, and conspiracy to commit property fraud. Mr. Mills has provided substantial testimony in exchange for reduced charges. Mara felt her knees go weak. Ronan caught her elbow. It's over? She asked. The criminal investigation is just beginning, the investigator said. But your part in it is over. You're free to go home. Home. The word caught in Mara's throat. She thought about her room at the trading post, her kitchen with its clean counters and well-stocked pantry, the place she'd almost stopped thinking of as temporary. Thank you, she managed. The investigator nodded and went back inside. Mara stood on the courthouse steps as the sun set over Red Flint, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. I need to sit down, she said. They found a bench near the courthouse. Mara sat and tried to process what had just happened. Voss, the man who'd seemed untouchable, who'd controlled Red Flint like it was his personal kingdom, had been brought down, not by grand strategy or legal brilliance, but by pressure applied consistently until something finally cracked. Mills must have kept copies, Chen said, thinking out loud. Insurance, probably. When he realized the investigators were coming anyway, he decided those copies were worth more as bargaining chips than as secrets. So we didn't need to break into the courthouse at all, Ronan said. You didn't need to break in and get caught, Chen corrected. But if you hadn't found those documents first, you wouldn't have known what to tell the investigators to look for. Sometimes you win by accident on purpose. Over the next week, the full scope of Voss's corruption came out. Mills's testimony led to a paper trail showing years of fraudulent inspections, forged property transfers, and systematic elimination of business competition. Voss hadn't just targeted Ronan and Mara. He'd been running the same scheme across half the county, using his position as judge to rubber stamp his own illegal land grabs. The territorial administration moved fast. They appointed a temporary judge, suspended Mills's inspector license, and launched a full audit of county property records. Every business owner who'd been forced out came forward with their stories. The pattern was undeniable. Harlan Voss was arrested on 14 counts of fraud and corruption. His bail was set high enough that even his considerable wealth couldn't cover it. He sat in the same jail cell where Mara had spent her night, waiting for a trial that would determine whether he spent the next decade in territorial prison. Catherine and Margaret left Red Flint 3 days after Harlan's arrest. Mara heard they'd gone to Denver, trying to salvage what remained of the family's reputation. She never saw either of them again. The trading post came back to life slowly. With the closure order lifted, Mara returned to her kitchen and started cooking again. The men who'd been eating elsewhere came back, and new ones showed up, having heard the story of the cook who'd stood up to a corrupt judge and won. Business wasn't just good, it was better than it had ever been. Ronan had to hire help to keep up with the increased traffic through the post. Mara found herself training another cook to handle breakfast and lunch, so she could focus on the evening meals that had become the post's main draw. 2 months after Voss's arrest, Ronan asked Mara to walk with him to the burned section of the building. They'd been rebuilding it slowly, and the new wall was almost finished. I wanted to show you something, he said. He led her to the rebuilt office and pulled out a document, a property deed with fresh ink. What is this? Mara asked. The kitchen, Ronan said. I'm deeding it to you. The building, the equipment, everything. It's yours. Mara stared at the document. Ronan, I can't. You can, he interrupted. You've earned it. That kitchen is successful because of you, not me. It should be yours legally, not just in practice. Why? Mara asked. The word came out shakier than she'd intended. Ronan looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen her clearly from the start. Because you deserve to own something. Because you've spent 12 years moving from place to place without anything to call your own. Because every person should have ground to stand on that nobody can take away. Mara took the deed with hands that trembled slightly. Her name was written there in official script, Mara Vale, owner of record. It was the first property she'd owned since Missouri, the first thing that was hers in longer than she could remember. Thank you, she said quietly. Thank yourself, Ronan said. You're the one who fought for it. The territorial investigation concluded 4 months later. Harlan Voss was found guilty on 12 of 14 counts and sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison. His property was seized to compensate the business owners he'd defrauded. The railroad deal he'd been angling for collapsed without his influence to push it through. Red Flint changed in the aftermath. The Merchants Association reorganized under new leadership. They established actual oversight of county inspections and created a process for appealing unfair regulations. It wasn't perfect. Corruption didn't disappear just because one corrupt man went to prison, but it was better. People had learned that standing together worked better than bending separately. Mara kept cooking. She expanded the kitchen, added more tables, hired a second cook permanently. The trading post became known throughout the territory as the place to stop for a hot meal on the way to anywhere. Miners and trappers and freighters spread the word. If you're passing through Red Flint, eat at Creed's. Some of the women who'd looked down on her at the cooking contest started speaking to her in town. Not all of them. Some people never got past their first judgments. But enough. The widow Morrison became a friend. Ellen Shaw, the seamstress, started trading dresses for meals. Small connections, small acceptances. The kind of thing that built slowly into community. A year after the trial, Mara stood in her kitchen preparing for the evening rush. Through the window, she could see the mountains rising in the distance, the same view she'd had since the first morning she'd woken up in Red Flint. But it looked different now. Less like a place she was passing through and more like a place she'd chosen. Rust was getting old, spending most of his time in the small paddock behind the kitchen, too arthritic for long rides anymore. Mara had bought a younger mule to handle supply runs, but she kept Rust anyway. He'd carried her to every place she'd run from and the one place she'd stayed. That deserved better than being sold when he stopped being useful. The evening rush came and went. Trappers and miners, a family passing through on their way to Oregon, 2 freight drivers Mara knew by name. She cooked the way she always cooked, with precision and care, turning ordinary ingredients into meals people would remember. After cleanup, she walked outside and found Ronan sitting on the porch, looking at the stars. "Good night?" he asked. "Good enough," Mara said. She sat beside him, not touching but close. They'd never talked about what existed between them, the partnership that had become something more without either of them naming it. Mara wasn't ready to name it yet. Maybe she never would be. But sitting here in the quiet with someone who'd stood beside her when standing was hardest felt like enough. "I was thinking," Ronan said after a while, "we should host another community supper. Make it a regular thing, first Saturday of every month." "That'll cut into profits," Mara said. "Some things are worth more than profit." Mara thought about the last community supper, about the people who'd shown up and the connections that had formed and the way it had catalyzed everything that came after. "All right," she said, "first Saturday of every month." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of the trading post settling into night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Closer by, Russ shifted in his paddock, his bell making soft music. Mara thought about the farm in Missouri and the places she'd run from and the moment she'd stepped into Red Flint's summer heat with nothing but a mule and a pot in desperation. She thought about Catherine Voss's ultimatum and the choice to stay instead of run. She thought about standing in that courtroom and speaking truth even when truth was dangerous. She'd come here to survive. She'd stayed to live. There was a difference, one she'd spent 12 years not understanding. Survival was getting through each day. Living was building something that lasted longer than fear. The kitchen was hers now. The ground beneath it was hers. Not because anyone had given it to her out of charity, but because she'd fought for it, stood for it, refused to be erased. That was the thing about power, Mara had learned. It wasn't something you were born with or something bestowed by authority. It was something you claimed by refusing to accept that you were powerless. Every person who'd stood up at that Merchants Association meeting had claimed a piece of power. Every merchant who'd filed a complaint had claimed it. Every witness who'd come forward had claimed it. And when enough people claimed their power together, even a man who owned half a county couldn't stand against them. The lesson wasn't that one person could change everything. The lesson was that one person could start something that gave other people permission to stand. That was what her community supper had done. That was what her testimony in court had done. Not changed everything alone, but changed enough that others felt brave enough to change the rest. "What are you thinking about?" Ronan asked. "How far I've come," Mara said, "and how I almost didn't." "But you did." "Yeah," Mara said. "I did." She looked at the kitchen, her kitchen, with its windows glowing warm in the dark. Inside those walls, she'd built something that mattered. Not just meals, but a place where people felt welcome, where miners who spent weeks alone in the mountains could sit at a table with strangers and share food and conversation, where freighters could stop being isolated and be part of something larger for an evening, where even a widow who'd lost everything could find community again. That was worth fighting for. Worth the burned wall and the jail cell and the confrontation with Harlan Voss. Worth all of it. Tomorrow she'd wake before dawn and start the fire and begin the day's bread. She'd feed the men who stopped through and the ones who'd made the trading post their temporary home. She'd cook with the same precision and care that had always defined her work. She'd build on what she'd started and keep building until the thing she'd created outlasted her. But tonight, she sat on the porch beside someone who'd seen her worth before she'd fully seen it herself. Sat in the place she'd almost left a dozen times. Sat in the knowledge that she'd stopped running and learned to stand and discovered that standing was what she'd needed all along. Red Flint would never be perfect. Corruption didn't end with one man's conviction, and power always found new ways to consolidate itself. But it was better now than it had been. And that was enough. Progress wasn't perfection. It was just refusing to accept that things couldn't change. Mara had been that refusal, had walked into a public contest and won on skill alone, had taken a job when powerful people wanted her gone, had cooked food that brought people together, had stood in a courtroom and spoken truth that half the town had been too scared to name. She wasn't a hero, wasn't anything special. Just a widow with a cast iron pot who'd decided that she was done being invisible. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes being done with invisibility was the first step toward everything else. The stars wheeled overhead, the night deepened, and in the morning Mara would wake and cook and continue building the life she'd almost been too afraid to claim. That was the real victory, she thought. Not defeating Harlan Voss or keeping her kitchen open or even owning property for the first time in years. The victory was waking up in the same place 2 mornings in a row and choosing to stay for a third. Was looking at her kitchen and thinking mine instead of temporary. Was sitting beside someone in comfortable silence and not wondering when she'd have to leave. The victory was finally, after 12 years of running, learning how to stay.